Welcome to another Q&A. Uh, yes, the question submitted. I was wondering if you could possibly have a Q&A or just a talk about grieving for a relationship that is changing for whatever reason, especially for aging parents and the decline in memory, etc. Yeah, it's a big change of a relationship. Um, the aging parents. I was a caretaker for my grandmother at her end of life, the last 2 years of her life. And towards the end, her mental capacity and memory and so on was declining pretty rapidly to the point where she didn't recognize me anymore. She called me other people's names. At some point, she started calling me numbers too, like 17. I think she started calling me 17. I don't know why. um, and yeah, I mean, just being present with what it feels like. It actually didn't bother me much. I knew she was. I kind of knew this was going to be happening, and as it happened, it's just. I guess there's just acceptance. Oh, okay. She doesn't know me. But the funny thing is, like the story of me, of Ryan, and our relationship together is actually one I don't really hold anyway. Actually, um, so like when you say she didn't remember me, what does she not remember? Well, she doesn't remember my name or our shared past. Uh, but I find in presence it's actually not a bad thing. I get on the form level though it might seem sad, and uh, I recognize that. I can appreciate that. But what I found was that when I could just be present with her, um, she didn't need to know my name. She just knew I was a friendly presence, one that was helping her, and listening and taking care of her as best I could. Um, I guess in a way, that's one of the ways the ego does latch on, right? Is our name and our past. Uh, and, they are not their past, and we are not our past. But you can still appreciate the past if we ourselves still have memory for now, right? Until it's our turn, in that level of aging where maybe our memory goes too. But uh, in the meantime, while we still do have our memory, we can enjoy it. It's not bad. You can appreciate all the lovely memories of the past with our family. But to recognize that none of that is really who we are. It's not who they are, and it's not who we are. It is beautiful. I think it is even safe to say timeless in its own right, where there's love. But the experience itself is gone, and all we have is right now, this moment. And with my grandmother passing, my main priority was just holding space for her and helping her transition, making sure she had as comfortable of a lifestyle as she could to her end of days. And then at the day of her death, just holding space for that. I actually worked there was this, I don't know if I've shared this before, maybe. I had this one random interesting job years ago where it was called Yominko. And I'd go to assisted living communities and I would teach, it was flamenco dance, yoga, and meditation all combined into a 1 hour program for assisted living members. And it was really beautiful to interact with lots of elderly people. And But there were times too where I was worked in the memory care unit where uh, Alzheimer's and different dementia, different memory affecting physical situations happening. It was very intriguing I noticed they were very present in some ways, but in other ways, like I remember this one guy we were dancing together, and he was telling me, he was kind of like giving me orders as if like he thought we were still in the army and I was his companion soldier or whatever, his fellow soldier, and he was like telling me things about what's going on, and he was in like a totally different world in his mind. uh, and I just kind of played along with it. It seemed better to go along with it than to tell him no, that he was wrong, he's in the wrong reality or something. Um, but I found just going with the flow of what they're experiencing, it was still beautiful and enjoyable. Because really, the key, the real gift is the shared presence between two beings. Even if that other being, our parent or anyone, is, even if they're totally lost in a delusional world, which actually you could say most humans are somewhat lost in some kind of delusional mind-made world. They're not here in this moment. They're all in this, all the thinking and thinking. And not judging that, but this is just how it is. In fact, the whole aspect of like spiritual awakening and a new earth is about each of us as individuals waking up out of this strong dream of the mind. Thinking, rah, 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 rah. And when thinking subsides, or we become aware of something within us that is not of thought, that's what's awakening, this aspect of consciousness that's beyond the mind, and how it really seems to deeply affect how we experience present moment. So when someone's aging, though, toward the end of life, and especially like as memory is lost and so on, I find in some ways that it's almost like the ego is organically dissolving in some ways, because the identification with past is one of the main aspects of ego. So when that falls away, well, they're still living, right? So they weren't their past, because the past dies, but they're still there, breathing. But now they're a little more present, because there isn't all that baggage of the past, all the complexity of our past. So in that sense, yeah, just enjoying this new kind of experience with them. But I get, from a child-parent perspective or some close relationship, I get that would be challenging in various ways. When our own parents or grandparents or whoever don't recognize us anymore, that's certainly a death of sorts. And if any emotions that come up around that, it's very important to honor, and any grieving or sadness or whatever. It's important to honor those emotions, be present with them, let yourself feel them, and let them pass through. But then ideally, if they're still around, then just it's in a way, it's kind of a fierce lesson of putting down our past and just being present with each other, which also is, there's a dropping of roles, right? Because when someone loses their past, they don't remember the roles in the relationship, which is interesting. What's also interesting, as I got older with my parents, I found that in some ways I kind of became more of the guiding, the guide, rather than being guided. The parent is the one guiding us. But then I find with both my parents now, I'm kind of more trying to help them. And so roles can flip too, just within relationships changing, and or certainly when someone's towards the end of life, and they are become very dependent on everyone else around them. Roles change in that sense too. It's also just, I think, such a fascinating, interesting, and almost poetic thing, how we are born, and as babies, we are so dependent on people around us to survive. and we have to wear diapers and all this jazz. And then we get to our end of life, and it's kind of the same thing. You have to wear diapers, and you know, unless you're really fit for most of your life, at some point, even if you are really fit, you still have to become dependent on caretakers, or you know, these different forms of care to get, you know, everyday things done. It's just it's part of the cycle, but it's fascinating to see that. Um, so yeah, declining in memory, aging parent. It's also really important with aging of our parents or of ourselves to look at aging very closely for our spiritual practice, and also just so that we can kind of be ready, as you know, for death ultimately, and for our own impermanence, our own death, because that's really kind of what aging is. It's this slow movement towards the edge of our form. Of course, it's not the end of everything. For you know, that's the beauty of spirituality. In many ways, is just saying, hey, there is something deeper than our physical bodies that we all are. It's spirit, and the spirit is not touched by death. So death is the dropping of the body and all the story that went along with the body, maybe, to some degree. But then, you know, Eckhart says the secret to life is to die before you die, to drop the identification with the stories and the past and the body and all this stuff, to drop it in a way of remembering who you really are. Now, you don't drop it in, and then people ask you who you are, and you know, and you say, "Oh, I don't have a name anymore." Our society won't really be able to handle that. So, you know, and probably end up homeless or something. So, you know, you still play the game. I still, you know, go by Ryan Ostheimer, and you know, I have all the numbers and the paperworks and all that jazz. But deeper within, I don't really carry this feeling of I am Ryan, and that I'm all this stuff that I do, you know, and all these mental ideas of who I am and what I'm about. That part died, gratefully. Well, actually, in my own awakening, it kind of died, and then the ego kind of rebuilt itself in different ways, and it kept trying to find ways to rebuild itself, this conceptual self, as awakened Ryan, or spiritual Ryan, or musician Ryan, or all these, you know, ego identities. But then, you know, thankfully, because the presence was awakened enough, I could catch each one and then kind of willingly let them go, rather than going through the pain of them dying. I willingly let them go. I wouldn't say kill, it's too violent of a word, but just dissolved, because it's an illusion. I mean, you can't really kill an illusion, but you can dissolve an illusion. Yeah, and so the secret, but when these identifications with the ego, with delusions and such dissolve, what we're left with is lovely. And so that's what, you know, with aging of ourselves and our loved ones, and then certainly as well when their memories declining, or our memories declining, it gratefully, thank goodness, we're none of that. so it's just kind of an invitation to look closer and deeper at who we really are. You and me and our loved ones, everyone we know. Who are we really? And presence. And so we can settle in presence, be present with others, with our family, with our parents, where the roles can go, the past can go, the future ideas can also go, and you're just being there with them, enjoying their company, and they're enjoying your company. And you're also kind of in the background recognizing this is all impermanent. So you kind of just soak it up while you have the chance, appreciating, and then grieving too, and feeling any emotions that are getting stirred up, because the attachment to past, the attachment to roles, the attachment to ego, these are all very sensitive links to our sense of self. They're sensitive at first anyway, until those links are fully dissolved. It can feel quite sensitive, and that's where emotion really charges up. And it's important to be aware and honest about our emotions and work through them, rather than just conceptually saying the spiritual right answer but ignoring the emotion. No, that's not it, the answer, because that would be bypassing. It is possible to know the spiritual answer so much deeply, though, that the emotion just isn't happening. That's different. That's transcendence. I was just watching a video from Eckhart where Tammy Simon asked him, does he experience emotions anymore? And he said, for the most part, no. But he defines emotions mainly as suffering. So not happiness, joy, love. These he doesn't define as emotions. Those are feelings and connected to presence, which he does experience. But emotions, the disturbance of emotion, anger, fear, sadness, jealousy, all that stuff, he rarely experiences it. And but it's not that he's running away from it. It just doesn't happen. And when it does, it's very short-lived. It just evaporates in his awareness. As soon as he becomes aware of it, this disappears. So that's our practice too, though. Any emotions that come up, we immediately bring awareness to them. And if the awareness is very deep, very strong, it will dissolve just quickly. If we're still working on deepening our awareness to presence, though, then it might take a little longer, which is fine too. We can't rush it. You just have to work with however long it takes. But yeah, it's another stating the obvious, but sometimes it's just interesting to note. Every human on the planet has parents. Every human that's ever existed had parents, because you need parents in order to be, created as humans. And of course, every parent has a child, because that's what makes them a parent. Of course, not everybody has a child. Some DNA lineages end with people that they decide not to have kids, or it just doesn't happen, or whatever. But pointing this out because this processing our parents aging or dying, or certainly the memory loss and so on, quite a universal challenge, an inevitable challenge for everyone. Of course, not everyone meets that challenge. Maybe some people have really bumpy relationships with their parents and they just avoid them all the way to the end, and they're not involved at all, or some random accident happens and then they're gone. These things do happen too. But yeah, for the most part, we are fortunate to keep aging, and so it's something we have to look at. Sometimes too, relationships can become more intense or toxic in some ways, like with my grandmother, because she had a lot of unconscious stuff going on. I know she did the best she could, but humans can only act where they're at. And at her end of life, it's like the toxicity multiplied even more so. I think because the conditions, maybe because she wasn't quite grieving her coming to an end, or who knows, there's also grieving of for the person who's aging. When you lose your independence, that can be quite painful. If you're not already kind of preparing yourself, that can really sting. And it's a huge blow to the ego, because the ego loves to feel, I did it, me, independent type of thing. So it's a big blow to the ego. But point is, from the aging parent's perspective, they have a lot to be processing as well. And it is fairly common in the older generations that this kind of conversation that we're having now, they've never really had. They've never really looked at it, contemplated, sat with their own emotions and so on, because the whole subject of aging and grieving and conscious awareness and presence and emotions and all this stuff is still kind of a new frontier for humans. So saying all of that just in the sense of as parents are aging and getting to their end of life, more than likely they don't know how to do it consciously, and so then their unconsciousness gets amplified because of the fear of death and the pain, the sadness, and all this jazz that comes with not knowing, how to handle it, or how they've handled their past parents, and so on. But so all this complexity puts more pressure on them, and then in some ways it can appear like they're coming out more toxic than normal, more aggressive, as my grandmother kind of did. But gratefully, I already had this spiritual view, and I was able to just hold space, not take it personally. When she had her moments of pain body, I would just let her go and wait till she calmed down. There were times she even called the cops on me, and my mom had to play referee. Oh man, pretty intense. But the funny thing is, even through all of that, like I could see that. It sounds strange, but like that she was kind of innocent, even in the mixed mess of all that stuff. Like I could just see like she didn't get it, and couldn't see the spiritual stuff that I was fortunate to be able to see, which also deepened my practice, and it allowed me to enjoy that whole experience as much as I could have, because it also felt sacred to hold space for her in her end of life, in its own right. When we can, I mean, it's a huge responsibility to take care of another, and not always very practical. Tricky thing our society does its best to handle. But it's interesting too, just a side note, how different societies handle senior living, or like taking care of seniors who start to become less independent and need more care. In the West here, we tend to be like, okay, it's time to go to assisted living community because, we're so busy. We have so many things we're doing and going, and we live in far away often, and so on. In other cultures, though, like my partner's Filipino, and her culture, it's and I think many cultures, it's much more common for the grandparent to live with the children, or the parent to live with the children, and then the child takes care of their parent at the end of life, which it sounds lovely, but also logistically it's very complicated sometimes. I think very difficult, not easy, especially, I mean, on the Western view, like how we see, what's that quote from Ram Dass? If you think you're enlightened, spend a week with your family, more specifically your parents. And so to take care of your parents at their end of life would be quite a spiritual challenge. Beautiful, but challenging for a child to do. And so not that there's any particular right answer either, but we just kind of work with how it evolves and what seems to be the best course of action. But either way, very important to really, I mean, ultimately you could summarize all of this as just be present with yourself and with whoever's in front of us. And so when we're being present with our family and these things are coming up, we're also noticing how we're reacting to it, because we're being present in ourselves at all times. And that's the key, that from there the processing happens. It's sort of just making sure that nothing goes past our radar of awareness ultimately, because when certain feelings or thoughts happen inside of us but we're not aware of them, that's really the one definition of being unconscious. It's just that there's things happening in us that we're not aware of. So our awakening focus is just bringing awareness to them, bringing light to that dark spot. Of course, then you get caught up in, well, what do I do with it once I catch it? And ironically, or interestingly, the catching it is actually usually enough, because it's your presence that is catching the unconsciousness. Your presence is the key to healing it, and is the power that can, transcend these things and so on. Granted, it's also helpful to hear answers on specifics with teachers and stuff, but yeah, one of the main key is your own awareness, your own presence, bringing it in, inviting it in, or finding it in the midst of feeling off in whatever way. So I hope that helps. Maybe speaking a little more on memory. It's a good subject just for all of us. It's in my family. It's funny. I'm kind of known as not having the greatest memory. I don't know why. I kind of wonder maybe if because I'm focusing so much on the present, I'm not really exercising my memory all that much anymore. Which is, I don't know if I consider that a bad thing though, because I remember what's important. I don't remember little unimportant details, but I remember important stuff. And also, thank goodness to technology like Google Calendar. That helps tremendously in remembering stuff and not having to carry it all in my head. But memory is one of the big roots of how ego happens because we identify with our past, which only happens because of memory. If we didn't remember our past, there could be no identification with it. And that's kind of what it feels like when I say that, when I let go of my past, it's that I'm not recalling it. I'm not discarding it or ignoring it, but I'm not indulging in it either. I'd rather be present in this moment right here with you as I'm speaking than go into my mind and think about, all the different things about the past. A really interesting thing about past and future, but we'll focus on past for right now. So we have present moment, right? Present moment is right now, this moment, the razor's edge of now, as it's called in Zen. And it's called the razor's edge because it's so easy to lose. We have present moment, but so easily we could fall into past or future. Thoughts of past, thoughts of future. And so with past, you could say what's behind this moment, what's already happened. Previous present moments, maybe we could call it in some way. I guess you could kind of say that. So there's the present moment, right? And then just off the present moment would be the recent past, which you could even go as close as looking at what I'm saying right now is becoming past. Right? As soon as I'm done saying it, it's now in the past. The only part that's in the now are the sounds as they're coming out. And as they end, it's past. So this is very acute, close past, you might call it. Then you look back farther to, let's say, 20 minutes ago when this talk began. Not that far back. But also past, not present. Memory, not present. And then you just keep going back to when you woke up this morning, and when what you did yesterday, and whatever the last person that upset you was, and going back further into the month and the year, and you go all the way back to childhood, where all kinds of stuff happened, positive and negative, that shaped us in many ways. All the jobs we've had, all the relationships, all the schooling and conversations that we've had, all the food we've eaten, so much stuff in the past. And all of that leads to this moment right here. And so memory, right, is we're in the present, but then in the present we go into our mind, and we think, the thoughts go into the past, and remember, wherever on that timeline, 5 minutes ago, what I just said, what happened yesterday. And a lot of things in the past, actually, though, were things that happened that we didn't process, or we didn't know how to process. And then they live inside of us. but we don't realize it. These like pain body and ego patterns that we absorb, that you could say only exist because the past is strong in us. Or say, for example, resentment, right? You have resentment towards somebody. One of my favorite things about being present is how it's a piercing forgiveness. Yeah, because let's say, I don't know, something happens. I'm never good at coming up with examples in the moment. It says the past. But I don't know. Yeah, let's say, okay, the other day my partner got really angry, got really triggered about something, and was coming at me full intensity, cussing and name calling and all this jazz. I held space and I didn't react. And next thing you know, she calmed down and it was all good, right? Now, in the moment, let's say the moment that she threw out a name call moment, right? The moment she throws it out, okay, I watch myself. There was no defensiveness. But then afterwards, 5 seconds after, that name is no longer existing. It's gone. That sense of action that was wrong is gone. It's in the past. It's only 5 seconds ago, but 5 seconds ago is not now. So when you really are able to be present, nothing sticks. Even like potential insults or negative energy doesn't stick, because it's like rain on a windshield with Windex or Rain-X, or whatever the thing is that lets the water droplets just go whoop. It doesn't stick. And so when you're really present, forgiveness just happens, because you're not there's no remembering what someone just did that's so upsetting. Whereas the mind loves remembering, right? Oh, how dare she call me that? Oh, blah, 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 blah. And it gets all in its thing. And hours later, and we're still just like, oh, I can't believe they did this. Or sometimes months, years, our whole lifetime, we hold these little resentments of, oh, I can't believe that person did that thing. Not realizing that we're holding on to past. And that's just the pain, is us holding on to the past. If we were to become present and drop the past, which, yes, means forgiveness, we'd be free. Because the present doesn't have any resentments. It's just existing. There's no problem right now. There's no so-and-so hurt me yesterday, right now. There's just now. So, but if the mind, right, if we let the mind really recall stuff that's happened previously through memory, and then it churns in that memory over and over, and it gets all stirred up and angry, and so much suffering. So that's one of my favorite aspects. There's many favorite aspects to all of this, but one is how really truly being present has such a powerful forgiveness to it, and just a willingness to drop stories. Something happens in the moment, okay? And maybe let's say someone does name call me, and this time it gets me. Maybe sometimes it doesn't, but this time it did. It did just the right thing, and oh, it stings. And I feel the sting and it hurts. Now the ego would want to retaliate, fire back, punch back with something as equally sharp, or, to get them. Right? And that's how you end up with arguments and stuff. People's egos and pain bodies just punching back and forth. But so let's say I wasn't present enough to catch it, and then my ego gets triggered and I yell back some obscene thing. And then they yell back, and then argument happens, big mess. And then, hours later, it's all calm, physically anyway. But emotionally, the storms are still brewing on both sides, And then it would be a practice of noticing, oh, it's just in ourselves, not the other person. We have to work with our space, our inner garden. But noticing, oh, My inner space is not peaceful and pleasant right now. It is stormy. It is full of rage and emotions and desire for vengeance, or who knows, feelings of being wronged, victim, all that kind of stuff. And in which case you'd want to be present with it and use your conscious awareness to heal all that disturbance inside. But part of that healing of it even could be looking at, okay, that just happened, let's say 3 hours ago, and now I can see it. Now I'm present, and I also recognize right now that it is past. That whole situation is past. It's done. I can also look at maybe, I'm also noticing a pattern in me that is judging. I'm judging myself for having lost it for 3 hours and for having become unconscious and saying things to this other person that I deep down I love, but I say things out of anger and hate and violence because I lost my consciousness in those 3 hours. And then there's maybe some self-judgment of that. But even there, you can find the forgiveness through present moment of recognizing, no, that is past, that is done. Am I showing up consciously right now? That's more important. And if yes, great. If no, well, then you just got to wait until you wake back up. Don't really have a choice until then. But so the being present also is like a willingness to drop stories. Now, in the dropping of, let's say, that argument 3 hours ago, what's important here to note, it's not forget about it, let it go, forget about it kind of thing, without any kind of self-accountability. That's where actually blind spots can further strengthen, is by saying, it's sort of like an avoidant energy of like, or a denial energy of like, well, that didn't happen. Moving on. Now I'm good again. I'm okay now. All right. All is well. That's not quite it either, because we do have to look at where we've lost it, bring awareness to where we lost it, shine light on that moment of unconsciousness so that the accountability helps to deepen our practice so that we don't lose it ultimately. After a lot of practice and a lot of holding ourselves accountable, ideally we have a mastery where when someone's coming at us, ultimate mastery is someone coming at us and it doesn't stick. So there is no need to work with any emotional reaction because it's not even happening in you. You just feel this peaceful freedom, even when they're in a really intense state. That's the full expression. But before that is feeling the impulse to react, but becoming aware of it and seeing that you have choice, and instead making space or speaking more from a calm acceptance or so on. Step before that would be losing it, but then immediately catching that you lost it and calling yourself out there, and then doing the same steps. And then, you go further into how long does it take before you become consciously aware that you've lost it, is kind of further back from that. So with the with the intention of true mastery, which true mastery also means true freedom, really. That's really the goal. It's not to be a master of the self where you can carry some fancy title. It's to have true freedom, true peace, true ending of suffering, liberation. And so with that intention, we do have to keep bringing awareness to where we lose it, where we become reactive, where we're judgmental, aggressive in any kind of way, even passive aggressive. I know, and for me, in my past, I had to be more careful with kind of smart-ass responses rather than just straight aggressive responses. They're more passive-aggressive is the way my ego likes to sneak in. So I have to be very careful with this and just be honest, aware, catch it, and when it does happen, I call it out and apologize or whatever. And then, that's the practice. But so then as you're practicing, though, too, right? Much practice means slipping. Practice doesn't mean mastery immediately. It means a lot of mistakes. But you keep working with these mistakes and you keep learning. And as you're working with the mistakes, though, and learning, that that forgiveness of the self, the dropping of that past, the not identifying with the past, all of that is kind of entwined in the learning process. Because if you're getting so caught up in judging yourself or beating yourself up for having slipped or becoming unconscious or saying something you shouldn't have or whatever, if you're too caught up in all that judgment, the denial will happen before you can even bring awareness to what you need to look at. And then you're stuck in more of a vicious unconscious cycle, which will create more suffering. The good news is, even if you get caught in these unconscious cycles, the suffering will inevitably wake us back up. So it's kind of the good thing about suffering. It's sort of a fire that always brings us back to the practice when we stray too far or get too lost in our own ego. I also really love interacting with people without holding them to past. So it's a strange feeling because it's sort of like I of course I do remember if I've talked with them before, maybe some of our conversations. I tend to remember things that they like, things that they love. I'm actually not very good with names, but I remember like what their kind of essence is about, what they're really interested in, or what they care about. That I find I remember more. But so there's kind of like a loose remembering of that, but it's also not defining them from that. So the not defining others by our experience of the past with them, which you could definitely relate to parents, to aging parents. We have a tremendous amount of shared past with our parents, which is why it tends to be the most difficult to let go of that attachment to our past with them. You can still very deeply love them, though, is the thing, but we're looking closely at where the mind gets in between, basically. Changing of relationships, just to go, we'll keep playing with this question. Changing of relationships. The context I started with is, primarily, I believe, what this question meant, but the changing of relationships in general is a big subject too, and is a very relevant one. Many relationships change. You might almost say relationships are change in a lot of ways, just continuously changing in small ways or big ways. I was recently thinking about a best friend of mine in high school. We were so close. We hung out like every day. And then when, high school ended, for whatever reason, we just kind of stopped talking. And, years just flew by. And then every now and then I get the urge to reach out to him, see how he's doing. And we have a little bit of a catch up, but then it kind of ends there. And it's just strange. It was just like, wow, this person was like my closest human. I hung out with them so many hours, and all of a sudden it just kind of died. Phew. Without warning. And I, for many years, didn't even, I guess, just so busy and caught up in whatever else was happening. It was almost like I certainly didn't process that at all. Never heard the idea of grieving an ending of a friendship or, something. The way I experience it now, though, this grieving, it's not like I'm breaking into tears. I mean, that would be okay if that happened, but it's more like just feeling the tenderness of, oh man, I miss hanging out with him, you know? Or another thing I'm grieving actually related to him is skateboarding. Skateboarding was one of my first loved activities. It was really one of my first meditations. After a long day of school and drama at the house, I would just go outside and skateboard all day long, all night until it got dark, and then I'd go inside. And I just loved it so much. And recently I have a skateboard now, but in my mid 30s, it hurts a lot more to slam on the concrete or asphalt. Like, I used to just crash every 5 seconds and just get right back up and do it again and crash, get back up and crash. And I was fine. I'd be a little sore, but nothing crazy. Now I fall once and I'm done for a week. It hurts a lot more now. And so there's a grieving in that. With the time, I didn't realize how short of a shelf life skateboarding is as an activity. They don't really talk about that until it's like, oh, it's happened. And then I'm seeing all these other guys my age who are, kind of saying the same thing. There's a few pros out there who are still going, but even they had to slow down. They couldn't do all the crazy stuff they did when they were younger. And so there's a grieving of that, like the loss of a certain ability. I mean, granted, it's nothing like, being at the end of life and not being able to go to the bathroom by yourself, but it's in that direction. It is kind of a first step, a step I wasn't even ready, even thinking like was a thing until it was like almost kind of too late. And I'm like, oh, well, that's gone. Wow, okay. I mean, I used to love it so much, get in the flow, be outside, listen to music. Although it did end up, in some ways it was an outlet for my emotions, but in other ways it kind of strengthened it. Because I'd get into rage, throwing the skateboard, doing all that jazz, cussing, yelling. But yeah, just this, grieving of unexpected things that come to an end, that we don't even realize that there's some quality to it of like a sadness, or just like, man, I miss that. So certainly we have to do this with relationships with our parents and such too, but even with smaller things like activities we used to do or friends we used to have. I'm just remembering, I think it's in The Power of Now. Eckhart says something along the lines of, there is one relationship I no longer have, and that's the relationship with myself. That's an interesting one. That's one of the core aspects of his awakening, was when he was 29 and this depressive dark night of the soul moment. He said, I can't live with myself any longer. And then he just heard that and wait a minute. I can't live with myself. Are there two of me? Who are these two different beings? I and the self I can't live with. And something just clicked. And then after that, I just watched this video where he recounts it. It's pretty interesting. But right after that too, this voice in him says, resist nothing. And so there was this really deep surrender, and then it kind of went blank as far as his memory goes. Of course, memory can't go into such experiences. And then he wakes up, and he's basically enlightened, and stays that way all the way up till today. So pretty far out. So basically that relationship with himself died that evening. The I and myself, I would probably could say the myself part died, and all that was left was the I, the presence, the emanating self, awareness. And so looking for ourselves, do we have a relationship with ourselves? What does that mean? What does that look like? I know for myself over the years, there was a lot of commentary, a lot of commentary, like this inner narrator just talking all about my day and all the things and all the people and how it all comes, affects me and me. A really valuable thing to watch in thought observation is how so much of our thinking is kind of this egocentric me in the center. When thought's happening, it's like, oh, what did this person say about me? And what do I think about them? And how does this affect me? And what's in this for me? There's this me in the middle of all the thought. It's, and everything, because like a couple hundred years ago, humans thought that the earth was the center of the universe. Egocentrism, thinking the world revolves around us. and then someone else said, no, we were revolving around the sun, and then they called him crazy. but yeah, this is we're going on a tangent, but it's important. The nature, the kind of narcissistic nature of our mind. Now, saying narcissism without like like fierce judgment or anything, it's not a bad thing. It didn't fail. However, it's the nature of the ego to have narcissistic traits, to be in this this over-infatuated selfness, where, it's just me kind of stuff. And so something great to just keep watching within ourselves, observing. And can we go about our day from a state of non-me, you might say, state of presence? Obviously, there's still like a being, but it's just you're going about your day without all this excessive thought about the self, and about how others are interacting with us and how we're interacting with them. And there's just a lot more quiet because now thought really is only needed for like practical things. Oh, I need to figure out this issue, or maybe some creative work, or whatever. But when you clear out that chunk of all the me thinking, there's a lot of peace. So kind of different aspect, but very powerful, very important to watch for. This is where, I'm sure I've said this before, but Eckhart does talk a lot about the power of being nobody in particular. And I've come to realize like just how lovely that, what it feels like, what it is, and just how true it is, like to be nobody in particular, because the ego wants to be somebody special, somebody important, successful, I made it, kind of thing, impressive, maybe probably another word that ego really seeks. And I remember wanting all of that stuff. But then as I started to experience this awakening and consciously moving towards it and so on, I realized like, well, one, deep down, who we really are is as special as it gets. And that's why settling for anything on the world of form is losing compared to the sacredness and specialness of who we really are. However, the knowing of who we really are on that sacred level is not of a conceptual self, and so there is no ability for self-inflation about the fact that we're so sacredly important, because it's the very power and essence of that truth that's like it's too vast for any human concept to try to grasp or bottle up. So long story short, it's really lovely to be nobody in particular. You can almost call it like a fly on the wall, just a being, just being here. when I guess there are some in situations now that I'm in where I kind of have some seniority or some sense of status. I don't think of it that way from my end, but maybe that's how other people see it. Like when I'm in the Eckhart Forum, and I'm the moderator and stuff. The way I experience it though is like I'm this is my role to be of service to all the beings that come to this community, and to be of service to the teachings and to Eckhart's work and so on. It's like my way of being of service is how I see it. There's no like extra stuff added to myself. But I notice sometimes other people will talk to me and it kind of has this flavor as if they're seeing me as like a little special or something, or maybe now that I'm, spiritual teacher too on this platform. This is another role that I'm honoring, but I really don't think of myself as a spiritual teacher. It's something I enjoy doing, and I love when I can be of assistance to others, but I'm very careful not to hold a conceptual identity of teacher, because that could be really inflating to the self. Ooh, spiritual teacher, look at me, fancy. But what I've found, and the reason why it can easily pass on those options, is because when you do feel the joy of being and the freedom from the burden of being a somebody, when you feel that freedom, it's an easy choice. not to bite any of the bait of the world, telling us that we're particularly special or superior or something. Because no, nobody is. I mean, and the cool thing is, like, everyone in existence is equal. How can there be specialness when we're all equal? And the being nobody in particular is also a deep knowing of nobody is anyone in particular, or everyone is nobody in particular. Everyone is presence. Everyone is equally this astounding sacredness. But most don't realize it, which is why awakening is needed. If everyone realized it, I wouldn't need to be a teacher anymore. And I guess I could just do more being, less doing. Because then if everyone gets it, then it's like, okay, cool. Now I can just, I don't know. That's an interesting question. What would I do if everyone did awaken? Okay, this feels complete. Thank you for the question. Thank you for listening, those who are watching this. I hope you have a lovely present moment right now. And may you enjoy being nobody as well.